saw one that had to sit.
The February 6, 2019 meeting of the Windsor Planning Commission will now come to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Doug Dennison,
Present.
Kelly Hall, Scott Reddy,
Present.
Gail Schick,
Present.
Cindy Showerman,
Present.
Daniel Foreman,
Present.
Town Board Liaison David Soslowski.
Present.
First item on tonight's agenda is the review of the agenda itself by the Planning Commission for any additional items or new business to be added to the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Showerman and seconded by Commissioner Foreman that we approve the agenda as presented. Those in favor will vote yes, those opposed vote no. And the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to our next item, which is public invited to be heard. If there is anyone in the audience who has an item that is not on tonight's agenda that they wish to present to the Planning Commission, now is the time to do so. And if you have something to present, or whether you have comments during a public hearing this evening, if you would be recognized by the chair, come up to our podium, give us your name and address. You'll have a 3-minute time limit to give us your information. During your presentation, you will have a green light indicator on the podium. When you have 30 seconds left in your 3 minutes, the yellow light will come on. And when the red light comes on, you better run, so. Just kidding. Anybody in the audience have anything this evening that is not on tonight's agenda they wish to give us some information about? Seeing there be none, we'll move to the next item, which is the consent calendar. This evening's consent calendar consists of the approval of the minutes of the January 16th, 2019 meeting.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Dennison, seconded by Commissioner Showerman, that we approve the minutes as presented. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes, those opposed vote no. And the motion carries unanimously. Moving into this evening's board action items. For the first item, we will close our regular meeting, open up a public hearing for a conditional use grant for a public utility installation. And Melissa, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. David.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. I see you've got 2 public hearing quasi-judicial matters on the agenda this evening. I need to read into the record with respect to both of those. I need to disclose I'm a sitting member of the town board, but I'm here in my capacity as a non-voting liaison to the Planning Commission. Although I'll be present during this public hearing, I will not be giving my opinion or participating in the discussion. I will not let tonight's proceedings influence or affect my review of this matter if and when it comes before the town board. I will make my decision at the board level based solely on the evidence presented during the town board public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, Melissa, you got the floor.
Yes, thank you. The applicant is Public Service Company of Colorado. They are requesting a conditional use grant for public utility installation, including transmission lines and substations. The conditional use grant is reviewed in accordance with Article 8 of Chapter 16 of the Municipal Code. In this particular case, the property is zoned residential mixed use, and that calls for the allowance of any accessory or conditional uses permitted in any residential district. In the single-family residential district, a public utility installation, including transmission lines and substations, requires a conditional use grant, and that's why we're reviewing it tonight as this. So the property is located northwest of Weld County Road 15 and Weld County Road 76 in the northern area of the town. The orientation map is up in the upper right-hand corner, and then a little closer in here. The property is zoned residential mixed use, as mentioned. Adjacent zoning to the south is residential mixed use. The other zoning around it is county zoning, and it's a mix of low-density residential and agricultural uses. So the proposed public utility installation is for a substation. It's on the greater 288-acre Thornton Farm site. This particular station will be sited on approximately 10 acres. It's located approximately 500 feet from Weld County Road 76. It's in the darker orange box there in the lighter orange area. The facility does include some transmission lines that go toward the north. It's about a half a mile within the town of Windsor, about 2 miles long, all the way up to into the Weld County. And that's that hashed dashed line that zippers down here. In addition, there will be some underground distribution lines along Weld County 76, but those will be buried, so you will not be seeing those. So here's the site plan. We're now zooming into that 10-acre site that we saw. There will be about approximately 800-foot-long access drive that comes up a Weld County road. It meets up with approximately across the Weld County Road 76 right away from Bryan Avenue, which is a public street in Weld County. The site, so in that 10-acre area, there'll be 6 acres that are developed with this facility. The facility will be, the perimeter of the facility will have a 10-foot chain link fence. The interior will be a mix of ground equipment and the towers, and then the transmission line towers will be going outside into the Thornton property, going northward. So here are some elevations. The ground equipment is going to be a gray metal. They will be varied in height between 35 feet. Well, they'll actually be up to 35 feet. So some will be shorter, but the maximum height of those ground equipment pieces will be about 35 feet or lower. The towers themselves, these you can see here, will range from 55 to 75 feet. And then the transmission towers, which are outside this view, range between 100 feet and 135 feet in height. I did want to mention that the facility would be about 600 feet long, so you can see what the elevation will look like from the east and west views. And then the width of the facility be about 500 feet, and that's the view from the north or the south. Here is a image that was made to create a simulation of what it might look like from Weld County 76. You can see this does not include the fence or the vegetation that's proposed at this time. So you can see the facility, the ground equipment, the towers, and then the transmission lines going to the north. There is a landscape plan that's included with this. They are focusing on the south portion of the site. That has to do with the location of the actual 10-foot facility site. It's set back again 500 feet from the Weld County 76, over 1,000 feet from Weld County 13, and over 1,000 feet from the northern property line for the Thornton Farm 24 property, and approximately 800 feet from the eastern property line. So along with the terrain that's on the east, the distances that are north and west, and then somewhat of the distance from the south, the focus of a vegetation screen to try to mask some of the equipment is focused on the south. And it's a range of evergreens that would be located on there. And the applicant has updated this since the last version that went out. I believe the one that you have in your packet was an earlier version that had a slightly different mix of vegetation. There was some feedback on using some different evergreen types that would be better for a low water use area. So those have been changed out, and there's been some addition of the rabbit brush to add some a little bit of different vegetation in there, and also maybe for some of the bird habitat in the area. This is still being under review. I wanted to let you know that the site plan and the landscaping plan are under review still, but it does help frame what the conditional use is. So these will continue to be looked at to make sure that they're adequate. So for the conditional use grant, town looks at about 9 different aspects. These are listed in the code That ranges from the character and the quality of the area which the use will be located, the physical appearance, the appropriate location of the buildings, the provision of parking and loading and circulation facilities, off-site vehicular and pedestrian traffic circulation, and impacts to traffic, storm drainage, planting screens, controls for hazardous conditions, and general compatibility of the proposed use. I want to say these are applied to all CUGs, so they might not apply to this one, but I just wanted to let you know that's what we're evaluating this proposal on. So in looking at this, the character and quality of the area in which the use will be located, it is a large site. The facility will be located set back from the County Road 76, and we do acknowledge there's residential uses to the south and to the east, but again, with the location of the site was taken into consideration on the impacts. For the physical appearance of the use, and I'll tie this in with the appropriate location of the building or buildings on the site. It's acknowledged that this transmission or substation is going to be viewable from 76 regardless of what's going to happen here. It's due to the height of the transmission poles, it's due to the height of the ground equipment and the towers within the facility. But it is set back. What the staff looked at is that it was set back from the road, that it wasn't right on Well County Road 76, that there was some terrain in between, and particularly to the east, and then the distance that will help mitigate the impacts from the north and west side of it. So again, the physical appearance will be that ground equipment, the transmission lines. You'll be able to see probably be able to see the chain link fence from that distance. Again, there's an access drive and the landscaping detention area. So adequate provision of parking and loading and circulation facilities. This is not applicable according to the narrative provided by the applicant. The major traffic will be during the construction phase, and then once that is done, it will turn into a maintenance phase, and that'll be done at a monthly time period. About every month they'll be checking for maintenance and facility and any issues that might come up. So it's not seen that there'll be need for parking and loading, plus they have a drive aisle in there. So that's planned in there, but there's no additional traffic being drawn to the site. So for the potential effect on the use upon the site for again, for the vehicular pedestrian traffic, the same thing, that low vehicular traffic generation is expected. Storm water and storm drainage will be reviewed during the site plan review. That'll make sure that the detention pond that is proposed will be of adequate size, and that they take into consider the appropriate storm drainage mitigation plans and management plans that are required during construction. So for the provision or the adequacy of planting screens where necessary, again, I showed you the landscape plan that they're working on, and staff is reviewing with the site plan. And then provision of controls to avoid hazardous conditions. The narrative explains how trash will be remedied and addressed, and that there's limited hazard substances on site. And then with this kind of facility, there is expected to be, in expectation or reaction to if there was ever a emergency that ever happened on the site. Public Service Company of Colorado does have emergency plans that would address those kind of items. And then again, for the compatibility of the proposed use within the area, it is recognized this is a transmission line and substation facility. It will be visible, but again, staff sees that adequate, or at least steps were taken to reduce the impacts. Again, this is allowed in the zone with this conditional use grant. I did want to note that this is a permanent use. This won't be something that we typically see with conditional use grants, which are granted for like a 5-year or 3-year period. So notification was done for this meeting per the code standards. I did want to say that neighborhood meeting is not required for this proposal, and that's why one was not held recently. However, the applicant did hold one in the fall of 2018. I did include community concerns and letters both of concerns and also of support in the packet that you got. That includes the minutes from the annexation hearings that happened last spring for the Thornton Farm 24 annexation. Some of the folks that came out to that had expressed concerns on the Avery substation, so those were included in your packet, along with support letters that were submitted, and those generally talk about the need for more support for the power grid here due to the demand that's being caused by growth in the area. And then we've got community concerns that range from visibility impacts on property values, impacts on the bird species in the area, and potential impacts on the wetlands. And I believe there's a few traffic in the area, or the submitted letters speak for themselves. I did receive 5 letters since your packet went out last week. 4 of them were emailed to you yesterday, and then 1 was distributed today. I didn't get Kelly one, but I will give it to you. So just want to let you know about that. For the recommendations, staff does recommend the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval of the conditional use grant application to the town board with the following conditions: that the site plan, including the landscaping is reviewed and approved by staff prior to the construction of the facility. That landscaping is required on the south portion of the site to assist in the screening of the facility from the vantage points from the south. That the applicant will obtain all applicable town and state permitting for the facilities and the development operations. That includes the access permit from the town off of Weld County Road 76, and then also the International Building Code does require that any fences over 7 feet get a building permit. So those are the recommendations from staff. I did want to say that staff requests that the following be entered into the record, which is the application and supplemental materials, the staff memorandum, and the supporting documents, the testimony from this public hearing, and then also the recommendation. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm sure there will be questions. I do want to know that, I did want to let you know that the representative from Public Service Company of Colorado is here as well. He has a short presentation to show you, but if there's any questions that I can't answer, I'm sure he can address them. So.
Okay, thanks, Melissa.
Sure.
Does the applicant have any further information they want to share? Okay. Since this is the public hearing portion of the process, is there anyone in the audience who has any comments pertaining to this or questions? Now is the time to do that. So if you want to make a comment, raise your hand. We'll go from there. Yes, sir. If you could come to the podium, give us your name and address.
Mike Mitchell, 6771 Stevens Street. That's Roth subdivision. It's right next to 76 on, right at the pond and right across from the proposed Avery. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All I have 2 questions first, and neither one's been answered, but I've asked them several times at Public Service. And the first one is Roth going to get the electricity direct from Avery, or are we going to be still subjected to the 1970s process from Timnath all the way down to the railroad tracks on Great Western Railway on 15 and come up, which is about 8 miles of power poles and power lines that we could cut short? I've asked that question numerous times, and the only answer I get, well, that's my understanding. So I just need if I may, if it's in my rights, a yes or no on that one. Also, up in Roth subdivision, there's a lot of scuttlebutt about a buy and sell contract between XL and Thornton for that little square of 10 acres that we're calling Avery now, back in October of last year. And I've asked email-wise several times, is that a rumor or is it truth? And I've received radio silence on that one, complete radio silence. So, a simple yes or no will work on that one also. And finally, I see we get 500 feet from 76 up to Avery. We've got 200 acres. And I see Weld County 13 gets 1,000 foot buffer. So 500 feet seems, it's a good round figure. maybe arbitrary, I don't know, but I think it would be, since we have all this space, if we could possibly please move, at least, if you're gonna settle on Avery, move it back another 500 feet. Wouldn't hurt a thing, geology or anything else. And then that would help soothe some of us that live right next to that. And that's it. I appreciate your time and appreciate you inviting us here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Take care.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Laurie Langhorne. I live at 6855 Stevens Street in the Roth subdivision. Thank you for hearing us out on this. This is a painful process for those of us that live right next to this proposed site. I would just like to read you a letter that I wrote. I would like to state my concerns regarding the proposed Excel Avery substation site in Windsor. I have lived in my home in the Roth subdivision since March of 1989, essentially 30 years. My backyard overlooks the wetland area that straddles County Road 76 and the farmland that surrounds it. Beyond the wetland, I can see the mountains in the distance. My children have been raised in this home, and we have immensely enjoyed the beautiful, peaceful setting of rural living. We have taken much delight in the serenity of our surroundings. Long walks on country roads, strolling along the pond in the spring to watch the baby geese and ducks, croaking of frogs in the summertime, the wildlife that the wetlands attract, and the beautiful views are just a few of the meaningful events that have defined our life here. I've always assumed with sadness that the farmland to our north would someday be developed. So this is going to be directly to the north of where I live. I never in my worst nightmares imagined it would be home to a substation. My deck, which now overlooks the wetlands and mountains, would overlook a monstrosity of an eyesore. This is as grievous as the knowledge that my property value may decline as much as 30%. For the homeowners in the Roth subdivision that have poured their lives into their homes and properties over the last 45 years, this proposed site is absurd and heartbreaking. There are numerous other land options that would have much less impact on the lives in this community. The substation should be placed in an as yet undeveloped area where potential home buyers have the option whether or not to live right next to a hideous site such as this. We should be given this option. Even the plans to landscape on one side of this site do not assuage any concerns, as it will take many years for trees and vegetation to grow up enough to provide relief from the ugliness of such a structure. So I just ask you to consider your home, where you live, your backyard, your surroundings, and what kind of impact would this have on you, to have something like this built right in your backyard, where you've got views of a pond, a wetlands area. We love, all the neighbors in this area, we love our wetlands. We cherish this. And so I ask you to consider moving this to a different site. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening. Eric Vanoy, 36925 Galen Avenue. I'm on the corner of 76 and Galen. We are one of the three closest properties to this proposed site. I would request that this conditional use be denied. My bigger concerns is this has been shrouded in a great deal of lack of transparency. I've got a copy of the original proposed sites that's on Excel's website and is still on that website that shows it further to the west of us. Only until the last, I believe it's 7 or 8 months, has anything shown up that showed it on the site that it currently is being proposed on. I wasn't concerned about it because it was further away from my property. One of the pictures that was shown earlier of the mock-up of the site is about 400 feet. I'm 400 feet south of that. That's exactly what I'm going to be looking at as I look off of my back porch. So I'm concerned of the way this has been handled. I'm concerned that one of the original sites was just to the north of the Harmony Golf Course. Why was that not selected? Enough money on the hill that they could chase them away? Was Windsong north, same thing. Harmony Ridge, the other subdivision out there, one of the proposed sites was right north of it. All of a sudden, it's over where I perceive the path of least resistance is. So that's a number of my concerns. As was mentioned, the 3 to 30% potential in the decline of our property values, I don't think that should be forced on anybody. If it was forced on anybody else, I don't think they would appreciate it either. Like was also mentioned, the way it's going to look, I will call their landscape efforts pathetic at best. To put 6-foot trees in front of a site that's going to have a minimum of 35-foot structures, we'll all be dead before they'll do any good. As well as if this does happen, I'd like to see some sort of landscaping up both sides of it. Where that landscaping is going to be is only going to maybe shroud a small piece of this. I was talking to the public service representative about 2 weeks ago who told me even then that they weren't sure what the fence would be like. But yet it's all on these documents that it's going to be a 6-foot chain link. That's going to look more like a jail or a prison than anything else. The water changed when Harmony, or when the other subdivision to the west of us went in. The water retention that's there, I'm concerned that it's going to change even more once this is developed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Marsha Etta. My husband Ron and I live at 6711 Stephen Street, Windsor, 887 feet directly south of the proposed substation in unincorporated Weld County. We don't live in the town, but we worked in Windsor. Whenever goods and services are available here, it's where we go instead of elsewhere. We share schools, the library, postal service, and fire protection. We are part of your community. We chose our 1-acre lot among many that were available in Roth and elsewhere because of its proximity to the park, with its pond below us and the surrounding fields. Later, we added a 2nd acre. This has been our home for 46 years. Growth has made Windsor a more attractive place in many ways, but locating an obtrusive utility demanded by growth next to the first subdivision in the unincorporated county is unfair at best. Our quiet, leafy location is enviable. Windsor's strategic plan calls for the purchase of open space, reflecting residents' desire for nature close to home. The stretch of Weld County Road 76 that passes the proposed substation site, though not public, offers restful vistas and bird life in the wetland, all for free. A most desirable place in the Windsor community will become the ugliest. Roth subdivision's low density has become a target. A high-density subdivision with no buffer backs right up to our neighbors on the west. A tourist attraction nearly landed on our eastern border. 47 oil and gas wells are coming. Excel finds our open space a plus. They found constraints at many possible sites, but our presence did not deter them. A satellite view shows lots of open land, but most of this is private property, used for livestock, RV storage, vegetable and flower gardens, small businesses, mini forests, havens for migrating warblers, or just plain peace and quiet. A row of trees can't hide 75 feet tall structures, of course, and including corn as a masking landscape with its short season is worthless. The planning staff has found compatibility a challenge. We will face that challenge each day. Stephen Street's on a hill. Our story-and-a-half home and property are elevated above Road 76. Our view tops our 6-foot fence and extends all the way to Highway 14. The substation will fill the view from our home in the upper part of our yard. Public Service Company's detailed narrative description claims that the preferred substation location and transmission route have been selected after presenting various siting options to stakeholders and surrounding landowners during an open house in 2016, with public input gathered from 2016 to 2017. You know from my letter in the packet that this is not true. You've received several letters in support of the substation. Many of them are replicated. Who generated this letter? None of the writers live close to this site. One supporter, prompted by XL, did a drive-by and praised the location and landscaping. He's not seen the view from our home or from our neighbors. We all agree that the power system needs an upgrade, but this is not the place. If the substation needs to be on the Thornton farm, then,
You can go ahead and finish.
can I continue?
Yeah, you can finish.
I'm almost done. We all agree that the power system needs an upgrade, but this is not the place. If the substation needs to be on the Thornton farm, the northwest corner would impact fewer people and be closer to new development. I urge you not to approve the CUG for this site, but if Windsor does give approval, I would like to add the following conditions: that construction take place between November and April to avoid migration and nesting season, that the wetland continue to be supplied with sufficient runoff, that XL provide trees and planting for neighboring private property at residents' request to provide screening. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Any other comments? Any questions for the applicant or from the commission, or comments from the commission? Cindy?
Melissa, can you show us on that map you had up earlier that had the orange site and the transmission lines, where that wetland is in relation to that?
Is this the slide that you were in?
Yeah.
Okay, so the wetland is between, south of the orange block, which is the 10-acre station site, and the road, and then there's also a portion of the wetlands on the south side of the road, on the north portion of Roth Estates.
So this facility doesn't directly impact that wetland?
No, it's outside the wetland area.
Any other comments? I got a couple questions for the applicant, if I could get you up to the podium.
Yes. Good evening, Planning Commission members. My name is Derek Holscher. I'm with Public Service Company, Colorado. Address is 1800 Larimer Street, Denver, Colorado, 80202.
Thanks, Derek. The transmission lines that you're planning on, are proposing running to the north, can any of that be undergrounded?
That's a typical question that comes up. Since we are heavily regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, typically if there is a viable overhead route, we don't go underground. The costs associated with that are on the order of 10 to 20 times the amount of putting it overhead. In situations we do offer, if the landowner or if a developer comes to us and agrees they want it underground, if they pay for the difference of the overhead versus underground, we'll do that.
So it can be undergrounded?
Correct. But usually at the landowner developer request, and then they're on the hook for the bill on that.
The other question I had, is it possible to move that substation further to the north to have less impact on the area there?
Yeah, I was going to get into that in my presentation, but the 200-acre parcel that the city of Thornton owns, we were in negotiations with them for over a year on where to site that site on the 200 acres. And due to the current developments they have on the property, which include a lot of agricultural uses, some irrigation ditches, and then also their opportunity for future development on that property, this is the site that we ended up landing on with negotiations with the city of Thornton.
So is it possible to do that at this time, or?
To be honest, I would probably say 99% no. Like I said, it was over a year that we did those negotiations for where we currently have it located. And like I said, they have future plans for their property and existing uses that prohibit us from moving it.
And were there other sites that were considered for this substation?
Yes, yeah. Oh, we, over the course of, we've gone back to 2012 when we first started working on this project. We looked at a variety of sites at that point. We did end up landing on a site back in 2015 on a different location than we're at right now. We were unfortunately unable to get a subdivision exemption with Weld County prior to the land exchanging hands. Once that happened, the new landowner that took over, a developer, was not willing to work with us on that substation site. So we were essentially back to square one. And then from that point forward, we started the process all over again and looked at over 20 different sites in the immediate area.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for the applicant?
I had a follow-up. Do you, and I know you didn't show your presentation, maybe you have some maps in there, but can you show us some of the things that Thornton's doing on that property that would prevent the location from going further north?
Sure. I don't know how to get the presentation. And I do have another map in here that might show the wetland a little bit better. Answer your question.
And maybe with that, if you could explain the properties that you guys did look at and that process, maybe how you landed on this property would be very helpful.
I don't know, do you want to start at the beginning and just jump to the slides?
And then you can switch the slides here.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah,
take
we
it,
can start at the start.
or if you wanted to go from the beginning.
Yeah, would that be okay to start the presentation from
You
the
bet.
top, and then I can hit those questions along the way? Excellent. Yeah, so as Melissa, she framed up the project very well. I think it covered a lot of the overall background of the project, but I wanted to get in a little bit more details and some of the background on the project. Like she mentioned, this is a new 10-acre substation site. It also it has a component of 1.5 miles of transmission line, which is 230 kV overhead double circuit. That transmission line is about just over 1.5 miles long. It covers 3 different jurisdictions, unincorporated Weld County, Town of Severance, and then Town of Windsor. And then as part of the project, we also have underground distribution as well as overhead distribution that'll serve the jurisdictions in the area. This here is a overall map of kind of what I just explained there. This line at the top here, the purple one, that's our source for the project. That's a Platte River Power Authority, Platte River Power Authority transmission line that we will be tapping into, which will provide the power for the substation. This line right here represents the route for the transmission line. The green segment there represents the section that's in unincorporated Weld County, which we've already received approval on. The middle section there in pink is the Town of Severance portion. Those folks do not have any land use permit requirements, so essentially we have approval in that jurisdiction as well. And then the orange line here and the substation is the portions that are located in Town of Windsor. Just talk a little bit about the need. I know Melissa touched on it, that obviously the need is here and the growth is happening. So the current system that we have in place serving the area here doesn't have the capability to reliably serve the area. Not only the existing load that's on the system, but also everything that's anticipated to be coming on the system. The project will also back up 2 substations that we have on the outer limits of our growth area, which is Windsor Substation and Cobb Lake up north. It'll provide backup for those 2 substations. Just in the last 3 years, we've experienced a high demand on the system, which has resulted in outages affecting over 8,000 people, homes and businesses. And these power interruptions, have put our residents, businesses, schools, daycares, senior facilities all at risk, and will ultimately affect the future growth in the area. I got a couple of figures here. The information is slightly dated. This is from the U.S. Census from 2016. But I think the graph kind of speaks for itself. It shows Timness, Severance, and Windsor, the population increases that have occurred over the last 10 years, and then what's projected for the next 5 years. And then I have a slide here that talks about some of the development that's taking place in the area. We got these figures last year, so they may not be quite as current, but as you can see, there's over 2,200 residential units under development and nearly 1,700 residential units under review. Kind of frame up a little bit of the project timeline. Like I mentioned, this started way back in 2012. When we started planning for the new substation, we had an open house, a public open house at the Windsor Recreation Center that helped us narrow down sites for a new substation. Some time had lapsed there because the availability of land up here and willing landowners to sell was pretty limited. So in May 2014, we did follow up with a second open house kind of to share the results of what we had come across over the last 2 years. And in between then, in May of 2015, since we are regulated by the PUC, we did receive what they call a certificate of public convenience and necessity, which basically establishes the need for the project and allows us to move forward with permitting and land acquisition efforts. And like I mentioned, in 2015, we did have an initial site, which unfortunately didn't pan out for us. So at that point, we were back to square one and started reviewing sites again. We further analyzed the sites that were available out there based on some public input, the availability to purchase, and other environmental constraints. And then that takes us to today, essentially, where we, no, I'm sorry, jumping ahead here a little bit. In August 2016, we did have a third open house after our work from losing our initial site. We did a pretty large mailing. We had over 600 people invited, including the whole subdivision of Roth and the Northeast Estates, which is just east of the current proposed site. And we had about 37 attendees at that hearing, or I'm sorry, open house, and about 180 comments we received revealed the preference for the Area 2, which I'll get in here eventually. Kind of going further on the project timeline here, like I mentioned, back in November of 2017 is actually when we started our negotiations with the City of Thornton to get that 10-acre parcel on their property. Back in September of this last year, we did, like I mentioned, receive approval from Weld County for the 1/3 of the transmission line that's in their jurisdiction. And then Town of Severance doesn't have any land use permit approvals required for their jurisdiction. And then in November of 2018, most recently, we had met with representatives of the Ross subdivision to talk about the current site that we're looking at and get their feedback on what they were, or their concerns. Excuse me. And then in December, just before the end of the year here, we did submit our land use permits to the Town of Windsor for that substation site in the last portion of the transmission line. And of course, today we are seeking your approval or recommendation to the town board for approval. We're also looking at securing the remaining land rights that are required for the project. Then we would, assuming we get approval, we'd obtain the construction permits, and we're slated to start construction in April this year. So here's a map that kind of shows the area at large. This substation at the top here is Cobb Lake. Down here you have the Windsor substation. They're kind of on, like I said, the outer limits of our growth area. And then the proposed site is right here, kind of in the middle between the two. And then we have a couple different developments in there that we're aware of. I know there's several others going on, but those are some of the larger developments. Here's a map that shows all the 20 sites that we looked at prior to getting to the site that we're in front of you today about. That took place over the last 2 years. We evaluated about 20 different sites. And when we do that evaluation, there is a long list of opportunities and constraints that we look at. Opportunities obviously are with the transmission line, if we could follow an existing transmission line corridor or a road corridor. And then with substation sites, we look at a variety of environmental constraints, whether that be floodplains, soil conditions, wetlands, a variety of things. And we kind of narrow all that down into areas. In this case, we didn't look at specific sites. We tried to narrow it down to 3 different areas that would work, and then we kind of would drill down on those areas to find a suitable 10-acre site. So after conducting that, we did our open house in 2016, and that showed these 3 areas. Area 1 here, Area 2's to the east, and then Area 3 right in the center. And we also had different transmission line routes associated with each site. So these are the options that we presented at the open house in 2016, where we received the majority of support for Area 2 and transmission line route I, which is the further east one here. And as mentioned before, we did try to keep it in this area as much as we could. But as you can see on the next slide here, this is, then the blue represents the Area 2 siting area that we were focused on. The yellow represents the property owned by Thornton. And then this purple box represents the site that we're in front of you today with. So when working with Thornton, like I said, we initially had looked at a site right here. They had an irrigation ditch that runs right across here, which prohibited us there. And then for their future development plans, they wanted to keep a lot of this side open for future development. There's also some oil and gas wells here that we have to maintain a certain clearance from our facilities with. So that's what kept pushing us further east. And what we ultimately landed on was this site here in our negotiations with Thornton. It allows them to continue their agricultural operations up here with their irrigation system. And we took advantage of this large berm right here that would provide screening to the east. We did shove it back 500 feet as far as we could, to provide some buffer to the south. And as Melissa mentioned, we have quite a bit of distance from the north and the west. Here's a little bit more of a detailed zoom-in shot of the substation site. To answer your question, Cindy, this is the wetland area right here. We did do a wetland delineation study as part of the efforts looking at this site. And we did, stay far enough away so we don't have any impacts to the wetland. Our access road comes across here, and this is actually a wetland up here as well. So we were able to skirt in between both of them with the access road and our distribution feeders, which is what's shown here in the purple. And we do have the 500 feet. And that's to the edge of the property. We do have our on-site detention right here, and then additional distance before you get to the first equipment. So when you factor that in, it's over 600 feet from Weld County Road 76. Oops, I think this is just this was a photo simulation we did that Melissa had in her presentation as well, but it includes the initial landscape plan that we had, which since has changed. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a revised photo simulation in time for this, but we will for the town board. And we thought there might be also some additional changes with the landscape plan from tonight until town board, so that's why we didn't move forward with the simulation. But we are committed to working with the town and the residents on that landscape plan. And just to wrap it up here, we have just a list of some benefits that the project will produce for the area, including the town of Windsor, which is the increased reliability. That's number one for us. The capacity for future growth, help the economic plans for the area. It's a long-term location as well with this substation site and what we anticipate the full build-out to be. We won't need another substation site in this area for on the order of over 50 years. So this is works the best for us in that sense. It's also near the biggest proposed development, which is less exposure for our distribution feeders. Once you start moving away from that load center, which is where the preferred location is, once you move out with those distribution feeders, the reliability goes down. So we're right close to the proposed developments. We're a real property taxpayer, and as Melissa mentioned, this is an unmanned site, so there's no natural gas or sewers services needed. There will be water, obviously, with the landscape plan, and we have worked with the city of Thornton. They have an existing water tap that serves an abandoned building on that site, so we've gotten their permission to be able to use that for the landscaping needs on this site. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your time, and we ask that you give us a favorable recommendation for the town board, and I'll answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Any further questions, comments from the
I have
commission?
another one, Mr. Chair. And this may be for you or for staff. I know one of the commenters brought up the idea of using a wall similar to what you've done, and I don't know if it's Excel or somebody else has done in Fort Collins and other places. Is that something that you've evaluated versus the chain link fence?
Excuse me, we really haven't evaluated at this point, but I think if that is something that the town board and yourselves would recommend, that would be something we would definitely entertain.
And along the same lines, one of the commenters tonight talked about some additional landscaping, maybe up the east and west sides of the facility. Are you amenable to that also?
Yeah.
I know it takes water to make that stuff grow.
Excuse me, yeah, and we, like Melissa mentioned, we would look at some species that are a little more drought tolerant and less water required to get them established and going. The problem with the substation, though, is with the footprint that we have and the size that we have, we're kind of limited with landscaping space. We have a very small tract down here in between the property line and the detention facility that we're looking at. We'd also have that same thin strip on this side. But with the transmission line coming in from the north, any landscaping along here would be a clearance issue for us with the transmission line. And then on the west side here, we have all of our distribution feeders coming out underground and then exiting out. So we don't want plant materials there to affect our underground facilities. So that is something that I think we could entertain, but with the limited space that we have.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the applicant, and if you're not able to answer tonight, if perhaps you could get the answers for one of the neighbors regarding whether or not this substation will serve the neighboring properties. And I think the other one was, does Excel own the 10 acres at this point in time, or is it a lease parcel still?
I can answer the second one there right now, at least. The contract that we have with the City of Thornton is what we call a purchase and sale agreement. It has been executed, but we can't move forward with closing on that property until we receive approval from Windsor. So if we don't receive approval, that site stays with the City of Thornton. As far as the question regarding the distribution service, I don't know. I do have some expert disciplines here. I don't know if anybody from our distribution group, Sean, if he's here, or, oh, excellent. Maybe Sean can address that question as far as whether or not the new distribution feeders for the substation are going to be feeding the Roth subdivision. I think that was the question.
Could we get you come to the podium? Thank you. Yeah, give us your name and address and go from there. Thank you.
Name and address. My name is Sean Despins. My home address. I live at 7853 West Mansfield Parkway, Lakewood, Colorado. So I just wanted to clarify that the Roth subdivision is kind of this neighborhood south of County Road 76. Mm-hmm. Yes, and yes, this Avery substation, the distribution feeders will be serving that area.
Yeah, so I think that took care of the two questions you had. If there's any other questions from you, or I can address some of the...
Do you have anything else, Scott?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Anyone else in the audience have any comments they wish to do at this time, since it's a public hearing yet? Way in the back, ma'am.
My name's Karen Warden. I'm at 37285 Lee Lake Avenue, and so I'm to the east of this project. Part of the landscaping plan, would berms be something the city could impose as an additional measure along with the landscaping to help block both east and west in the views? That's just my question for you.
Okay. Thank you. Sure. You want to answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I believe so. This is a good graph up here. With the, like I said, the limited space we have on each side, we wouldn't have the room to build a berm that would provide sufficient screening. I think you need a 3-to-1 slope on those typically, so the higher you go, the more wider space you need. So I'm not sure a berm would be effective on the south or the east side. Possibly on the north, but I'm not sure we'd be screening anything from the north. It's all agricultural. This is vacant right now. I believe it's slated for development, but I'm not sure what the time frame on that is. And with the views to the west, it's pretty far away. So I think we could look at it on the west side and north side, but like I said, then there would be also clearance issues with the transmission line on the north, and just whether or not the room we have on site would be sufficient to get height enough to provide screening.
And it's something you could look at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, Mike Mitchell again, and I'm at 6771 Stephen. I've been there 38 years, and it's right next to the wildlife pond and all that, like Miss Langhorne had said. and I've got that map too from 2016. And that Area 1 got beat back when the city of Thornton put out their big proclamation that they didn't want any substation next to Timnath because it would ruin their view. And I showed that to the whole city council. And so we got it moved over to Area 2, and please correct me if I make a mistake here. So apparently we ended up with Area 2, which is in the blue, but then I used the term and meant to, where we are now is pretty much arbitrary and capricious on the 500 feet back and 1,000 feet from 13. And in fact, I was wrong. It's not arbitrary and capricious. That is what the developers who want to buy all the rest of that land and populate it with people, which is fine, they've all just picked out their best spots for that land. And what we got left is now in the purple called Avery. So it's all been planned, and we haven't been in on any of those meetings, which is fine too. But, and I'll be done, it's still possible, if you wish, to move that back 1,000 feet. And hopefully that would be, that way you got that much less power line to deal with. Or we could start all over and go back to Area 1 and let Timnath have it. But that, I know that probably won't happen. Anyway, thank you very much. And please tell me what I said is wrong. What is wrong?
As far as the future development prospects for the Thornton property here, we're not aware of any. Thornton doesn't have any right now. They're just reserving it for the potential for future development. As far as we know, they haven't been approached by any developers. We didn't talk to any developers about where this needs to be located. The reason we can't go much further back north, like I said, there's an existing historical irrigation ditch here. And with the berm here, we wanted to leave that in place. We can move it back any further. The further we move it back, the further the access drive becomes for us as well. And in inclement weather, we have difficulties getting back to the substation if there were an emergency. As it is right now, the length of the access drive is longer than we would typically like, but we have agreed with the availability of the site. You know, we talked about this with the residents that we could approach the Thornton about moving this to a different location on site, but didn't think we'd get much traction with them. So like I mentioned, we've negotiated over a year on this. If they were not agreeable to move it, we would then have to look at condemnation, and that's something that we always try to avoid. Obviously for the costs involved for both sides, and it's just not good relations with, like we have to keep with our customers. So that's another reason why we landed on this site here.
Any further questions?
You said you had to look at condemnation?
I said if we went back to Thornton and said,
Sure.
you know, we want to move it back further,
Right.
and they weren't agreeable to that. At this point, the project's already behind schedule. We needed to get this in service as soon as possible. If they weren't agreeable to move it, and we don't have any other viable sites out there, we would have to look at condemnation, and that's something we always try to avoid.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Anyone else in the audience have any further comments that have not been talked about yet? No, Mike, well, hold on. You've had two chances yet. Somebody behind you there had some. I don't want to get in a debate this evening, so if it's something new that we haven't talked about, we can do that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two things. The meetings that were held for the public, originally when those were initiated, this thing was a lot farther west, as you can see in that blue area. I did not participate in those because I wasn't concerned about it then. But it hasn't been until just very recently that has come to the spot that it is now. The two things too, the ditch, I rode horses around that ditch for years. It can be moved. I also understand that there's no plans that Thornton has to do anything with that property. If you've been in the area any time at all, Thornton bought that with the intent of sucking water off to Denver, and then they were stopped. So that's the reason why they had that property. To my knowledge and from what I've been able to find, they're not planning on developing it themselves. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, if you have something new that you want to enlighten us with?
I just want to say thanks for getting my 2 questions answered that I've been working at for the last 6 months that nobody would give me a straight answer for. So thank you very much, Scott. You're my hero.
Yeah, we didn't know that before, so thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, just to, I guess, corroborate some of the information, staff, I guess, when this site eventually became the site that Excel was looking at, that's what initiated the conversation between Windsor and Thornton to actually annex the property, because during all of those preliminary hearings, it was still an unincorporated weld, and so the town board did enter into an IGA with Thornton to have them annex the property so that we would have the opportunity for tonight's hearing and for the conditional use grant process to go through Windsor as opposed to the Weld County process. So I guess the town is kind of, I don't want to say late to the game, but the property wasn't in town until last year. And so that's part of the reason why the process is somewhat late in Windsor. But it is also my understanding, as they've indicated, Thornton doesn't have any imminent development plans for the property. The reason that they wanted to keep the location where it's at is to preserve the farmability as it's historically been farmed, and whether or not ditches can be moved, that's something that wasn't discussed, but it was for farming purposes is why they chose that location, I think.
Good point of clarification, Scott, because if that wouldn't have been annexed to the town, this would already have been approved by Weld County, so, and we know how that goes. Anyone else?
I have a real concern based on one of the maps that I saw and the availability of area for landscaping along that south side, which is a major concern to most of us. That seems, I don't have the map, I'm sorry, but that south side landscaping area is very minimal on that south side. That doesn't leave a lot of options for,
Yeah, it's pretty much because of the footprint of the substation.
Yeah. And also, I just want to agree with what Eric said, a backhoe can move a ditch pretty easily. And also, I spoke personally to Scott Twombly. He is the real estate, let's see, I've got some communication. He is the real estate manager for the city of Thornton. It's my understanding that he dealt with the sale of this property. He told me that Thornton Farms did not want this substation anywhere on their property. They were reluctant to sell, but their hand was forced under the threat of property condemnation. He said, our only course of action is to lobby XL and the town of Windsor, as this is too far down the road for Thornton to do anything about it. Their hand has been forced. But Windsor has input as to how far off of the County Road 76 that this site should be. Thank you.
Okay. Unless somebody has something new that we haven't discussed tonight, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Showerman, second by Commissioner Dennison, that would close the public hearing. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. And motion carries 5-1. We will reconvene our regular meeting, moving on to the next agenda item, which is a recommendation to the town board for the conditional use grant for public utility installation that we just discussed in item number 1. Melissa, you have any further information that you want to give us?
No additional information.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would move to forward a recommendation to the town board for approval of the conditional use grant as presented, subject to the staff recommendations and conditions related to site plan and landscaping approval and proper permit.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Showerman, seconded by Commissioner Foreman, that we forward a recommendation of approval of the conditional use grant application to the town of Windsor, subject to the conditions that were listed. And I would also say to the applicant to take in consideration the things that were discussed this evening. So, those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. And motion carries 5-1. Okay, moving on to our next item. We will close our regular meeting, open up a public hearing for rain dance 5th filing. And Melissa, you have that.
Ready? So yeah, as I mentioned, this is a public hearing and recommendation to town board for the final major subdivision, Rain Dance Subdivision 5th filing. The major subdivisions are reviewed in accordance with Article 4 of Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code. The subject property is located in the Rain Dance overall subdivision, which is just east of Weld County 13 and south of New Liberty Road, north of Crossroads Boulevard. The site is highlighted in the yellow in the slide above. The property is zoned RMU, or residential mixed use, and as well as and is adjacent to other RMU zones. And on the west side of Weld County 13 is the estate lot zoning. This is this Filing 5, built on the overall Rain Dance Master Plan that you've been seeing over the past couple years, and includes the portion that's subdivided into residential lots, and then also another portion that will be for future development. So I'm zooming in here on the portion that's for the residential lots and leaving the portion for future development in this lower box. The plat overall with both pieces is 33.8 acres in total. 11.74 of those will be those single family lots, and in addition to those lots, it'll be a tract on the perimeter of those lots, which will be used for open space. That portion that was on the south portion is about 22 acres, and that's that future development. The residential area has 53 single family lots. Most of them are about 55 square feet. The range is from 55 to 87 square feet. One other thing I wanted to note from a modification from the preliminary plan is that 10 additional feet were added to the western lots. It was a minor addition, so we allowed it to be part of the final plan submittal. The houses will be 1- and 2-story houses with attached garages. They will be front-loaded. That is one of the items that the PUD allows, is a front-loaded product. Again, that open space tract that's in the perimeter area is about 4.6 acres. It's a mix of farm use, agriculture use, and then some open space with trail for the residents. And one thing that also was not mentioned in the preliminary was that this will be a two-phase project, with the first phase being on the eastern portion of the filing. So here's the landscaping plan and some improvements. You can see some detail. It's a little hard to read, but this is the rain dance has a theme for overall agricultural farm to table uses. So there'll be some agricultural fields around the perimeter of the filing, along with some open spaces and berms and some landscaping. There is a trail that is proposed. You can see it coming from the road system here, and then also coming down from New Liberty through the site, which will join up with the overall town trail system. One thing I wanted to point out here is that, so that you are aware of this, is that there is a conversation about a potential water line easement that would go down County Road 13. This is in conjunction with the overall Thornton plan that we just kind of touched on north of here, but there is discussion that there may be easements for water pipeline down 13. And if that happened, we talked to the developer applicant for this project, that if that happened, that there would be some insurances that if any trails that go in for public improvements, that those, if those are impacted with any future water line that might go on, and then also any landscaping or berm that's approved part of this, that those would be either avoided or put back at the expense of the developer, or whatever agreements they have with the pipeline or City of Thornton in the future. So I just want to let you know that. For comprehensive plan conformance, this does have some consistency with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, particularly the growth framework and the residential areas framework, and that has to do with maintaining the character of the community while accommodating future growth, and then also supporting a diverse housing and residential housing types and residential neighborhoods to meet the varying needs of the community. This too has a notification area. It's a public hearing. So those were sent out according to code standards. A neighborhood meeting was held during the preliminary subdivision review of this. That was included when we reviewed the preliminary major subdivision, but I also included it in the packet just to give you a refresher. In that particular public hearing, there was only about a handful of people, if not fewer than that, and the majority of the comments that we received had to do with what amenities were being provided. This is the 5th filing of the rain dance, so a lot of the information has been conveyed over the years. So in summary, staff does recommend that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to the town board for this final major subdivision plat, with a couple of conditions. One is that all outstanding staff comments on the subdivision plat will be addressed prior to the recording of the subdivision plat, and at this time there are minor adjustments that are required, so it's nothing major that will change from what you've seen. It's mostly technical engineering items. And that the applicant shall enter in a development agreement with the town prior to recording the subdivision plat, and that's a general requirement anyway, and we are working currently on a development agreement with the applicant. So staff requests that the following be entered into the record: the application and supplemental materials, the staff memorandum, supporting documents, the testimony from this hearing tonight, and then the recommendation. So that is the conclusion of the presentation. I did include something that we're trying to start to include is some of the things that we look at during the review of the subdivision, so in case that's helpful for you to make the decision. The applicant is here tonight if you have any questions that I can't answer. And again, that concludes the presentation.
Okay, does the applicant have any further information that he wants? I'm okay with that. Anybody in the audience have any comments for the public hearing portion of the process? If not, I entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Okay.
Melissa, with the easement along County Road 13, is there already easement in there for the eventual widening to 4 lanes of that road?
I believe any plans that are for the County Road 13 are able to be accommodated in the existing right-of-way, if Scott knows anything more than that, but I believe all the plans are included. There actually is one thing that is noted. There may be some need for additional right-of-way at the intersection of Liberty and County Road 13 due to plans for either a roundabout or an intersection going in there. But other than that, I don't think there's any additional needs, and I don't think it's been determined what that right-of-way looks like, but last input I got from engineering, it would be a minor modification of what's already there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else?
Close public hearing.
Second?
Been moved by Commissioner Dennison, second by Commissioner Sherman, that we close the public hearing. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed vote no. And motion carries unanimously. We'll reconvene our regular meeting, open up to the, going to the next agenda item, which is the recommendation to the town board for the major subdivision that we just listened to. Comments, questions from the commission?
Mr. Chair, I would move to forward a recommendation to the town board for approval of the major subdivision as presented.
Second.
And moved by Commissioner Showerman, second by Commissioner Foreman, that we recommend that we forward a recommendation of approval to the town board of the final major subdivision as presented with the conditions listed. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed vote no. And motion carries unanimously. Moving on to the next item is a preliminary major subdivision, Highland Meadows Golf Course subdivision. What is that?
So yes, preliminary major subdivision for the Highland Meadows Golf Course, 15th filing. This is reviewed as well as by accordance with Article 4 of Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code. This particular subdivision is proposed in the overall Highland Meadows Golf Course area. It's the 15th filing. The site is located just west of Highland Meadows Parkway between Colonial Drive and Crooked Stick Drive. The site is outlined in the black box on the slide. The site is also zoned RMU, or residential mixed use. It's adjacent to similar zoning to the north, some general commercial zoning to the south, and then estate zoning to the east. This preliminary plat builds on the overall Highland Meadows Golf Course Tract H master plan, which has been in review in the past few years. This Tract H master plan had planned for 62 patio homes for the Lot 17 and 110 multifamily homes planned for Lot 8. Those two lots are going to be joined for the new proposal that we're seeing tonight. And this new proposal will replace that one. So the new proposal is for 100 townhomes versus the counts that you heard before. So it is a lesser density proposal. The overall acreage is just under 16 acres. About just under 7 is for the townhome lots, and then just under 9 is for the common area. And that includes clubhouse, landscaping, access drives, utility corridors. So again, there'll be 100 lots, 100 townhomes. That'll be 4 per building, so 25 buildings. Oh, yeah, I apologize that I was thinking we were doing the site plan. We are only doing the plat portion of this. The site plan for this, the more detail will be presented in the next item. But for this, this shows you what the platting is for, and that is the reason for this platting is to allow for separate ownership and selling off of the individual townhome lots, and then also putting the common areas in the tract. So I'm reviewing this with the comprehensive plan. This also is consistent with the goals that we talked about for last project, which is the growth framework and the residential areas frameworks, trying to maintain the character of the community while accommodating future growth, and then also supporting diverse housing and residential neighbors to meet the needs of varying families and other community members. The notification for this one is on a public hearing, but it was for the neighborhood meeting. The neighborhood meeting was held in November 13th, 2018. Comments we heard, and those are included in your packet materials, included some concern on the setbacks along Highland Meadows Parkway, and a lot of these had to do with the site plan that you'll see, but they kind of got tied together. The neighborhood meetings for the major subdivision, not the site plan, but there's always overlap. There was some concern on the height of the buildings, from the views to the west, from the neighborhood to the east, traffic, and then associated headlights turning in and out of the project. So notifications for the neighborhood meeting were listed here on the slide. So staff does recommend to the Planning Commission to approve the preliminary major subdivision as presented, subject to all remaining Planning Commission and staff comments to be addressed in the final major subdivision plat stage, which will come to you once that is ready and submitted. So staff does request the following be entered into record: the application, the supplemental materials, staff memo, supporting documents, and this recommendation. So that is the presentation. Again, the applicant is here tonight if you have any questions that I cannot answer.
Okay, does the applicant have any further information he wants to tell us, or pearls of wisdom, John?
Okay.
Okay, questions, comments from the commission?
Would move to approve the preliminary major subdivision plan as presented.
Second.
And moved by Commissioner Sherman, second by Commissioner Dennison, that we approve the preliminary major subdivision as presented by staff. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. Motion carries unanimously. Move to the next item, which is the preliminary standard site plan.
So this is the site plan for the that would go on to that major subdivision property that we just reviewed. It's the Vernanza townhomes. Preliminary site plans are reviewed in accordance with Article 7 of Chapter 17 of the Code. Location is the same place as the prior project. Zoning is the same. And again, this replaces the previous master plan for Tract H of the Highland Meadows Golf Course, which had that 62 patio homes and 110 multifamily lots. To combine the two lots and then just propose the 100 townhomes on the 15.67 acre site. There are 25 4-unit buildings. Each of the buildings themselves have a footprint of 6,700 square feet. Each of the units will be, and I'll let the applicant go into this more, about between 2,000 and 2,500 square feet. Each of the units are proposed to have a small private yard, and then the buildings, which we'll see a little later in this presentation, are about 30 feet in height. Tract A is that common area that we talked about in the subdivision portion of this. It includes a 2,000 square foot clubhouse, the internal streets, utility quarters, landscaping. Looking at this plan with the 100 townhome lots, it'll be about 6.38 dwelling units per acre. This one, I just want to note that now I have north going to the right of the screen, so just so you know that we switched it on. It's then Highland Meadows Drive or Parkway, it should say, is to the east. So site plan characteristics, there are 4 parking spaces per unit proposed, which is the 2 garage and 2 driveway immediately in front of the garage. This is in excess of what is required, which is the 2, just 2 per unit. There is additional 62 guest parking throughout the development. That includes the clubhouse parking lot. I wanted to make a note about the building setbacks from Highland Meadows Parkway. There are some utility quarters that are through this area, and due to those, the setback varies from either 50 feet from the closest it gets, the buildings get, all the way to over 100 feet on the southern portion. This is in excess of what's typically allowed for or required for multifamily of this form, which is usually 20 feet, and I believe I just yes, it's usually a 20-foot setback. So this is over 50 feet to over 120 feet of setback. In that area, there'll be some landscaping. I did also want to point out that this is building on that overall Highland Meadows Golf Course plan, where there's a plan for a boardwalk that goes around the center pond, and there are trail connections that are proposed between that ring loop and the proposed subdivision we see here, or the proposed site plan that we see here. There will also be planned connections to the south once that develops. One of the new access points, there is an existing access here where the roundabout is. A new one will be planned just south of that area, and it has been noted on the master plan. So that is the same location as what was on the master plan. It'll just be physically a new entrance. So here's the landscaping plan, approximately 7 acres. There is a landscaping buffer along the line here. I wanted to say that this was submitted before our latest landscape plan comes in, so that this was reviewed with the previous landscape standards. So there is a 15-foot landscape buffer along Highland Meadows Parkway per the Meadows Golf Course Development Agreement, and the street trees and additional screening trees in the middle there. Here are the elevations. I do have color elevations coming up, but I wanted to show you. There is a mix of roof line. It's hard telling these drawings, but it's a variation. The highest points will get to about 30 feet, maybe a little higher, but it's within what's allowed in the area. The building materials are a mix of the stone veneer wainscot, and this was easier seen on the colored renderings. The stone entries and shingles, and then a straight, regular horizontal siding. And here is the backside of the garage, where the garages are located. And then this is the clubhouse, which will be similar materials, a shorter profile, but complementary to what the buildings look like. And here are the elevations with a little bit of coloring, so you can get an idea, feel the materials and the colors and the pattern and the variation in roof light and articulation on the front. And here's the side and the rear view. So this was found to be consistent with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, same ones that I've said twice tonight, so I'll let that go. So staff does recommend that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary site plan as presented, and that it's still subject to all the remaining planning commissions and staff comments to be addressed with the final site plan. And again, application materials, memorandum, all that, and the recommendation to be entered into the public record clerk. So that is that's the next one. So that is the presentation. I wanted to note that the next agenda item is a parking lot determination or parking determination. Clubhouses aren't listed as a detailed item in our parking, so that will be coming up in the next item.
Okay, John, do you have anything further you want to add? Okay, questions, comments from the commission?
Would move to approve the preliminary standard site plan as presented.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Showerman, second by Commissioner Foreman, that we approve the preliminary site plan as presented by staff. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed vote no. And motion carries unanimously. Next item is a parking determination for the item we just discussed.
Yes, so this is the clubhouse for the Highland Meadows Golf Course 15th filing Vernanza Townhomes plan that we just saw. Section 161030A7 in the parking standards says that if there's uses that aren't enumerated, the Plan Commission reviews to determine if there's adequate parking. So the clubhouse is about 2347 square feet. The proposal is for 17 spaces. We did look at the varying requirements that we had for existing clubhouses throughout the town, and all of them were very different. They had different amenities that were associated with them. We also looked at what we would park, say, a retail center like where the King Soopers is, or anything high generating, and that's at 1 space per 250 square feet of gross leasable area, and that doing that calculation was only about 10 would be required, and that's pretty high demand for parking. In addition, we looked at what nearby communities are doing, and one called out specifically clubhouses, and it was at a 1 per 200 square foot. So taking all that into consideration, the fact that there are 45 other open spaces in the area in addition to these 17, that it's adjacent to the homes that it intended to serve. There's church connections among the community that a lot of the users won't be needing parking. And just the amenities in the area, staff determines that, or staff is recommending that Planning Commission approve determine that the parking for the clubhouse is adequate as proposed. Staff requests to be entered into the record the application, the materials, the memorandum, the supporting documents, and the recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Melissa.
Sure.
Comments, questions from the commission? Personally, I think there's enough parking here that they have in place that'll take care of what the requirements are, so I have no problem with what they're proposing.
I would move to approve the parking determination as presented.
Second. It's been moved by Commissioner Sherman, seconded by Commissioner Dennison, that we approve that the parking accommodations for the clubhouse are adequate as proposed. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed vote no. And motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jason. Next item is preliminary, say that real quick. Preliminary major subdivision, Windshire Park subdivision. Carla, you get the floor now, huh?
Finally.
Yeah. Worked our way down to you.
There we go. Thank you, Planning Commissioners. Tonight, the Windshire Park Subdivision 6 filing is before you for preliminary major subdivision. This application was reviewed in compliance with Chapter 17 subdivision of the municipal code. The site is located north of Jacoby Road and west of Weld County, or 15th Street. It's within the existing Windshire subdivision, and this was previously known as the 4th filing. It was approved in 2017 for 57 townhome lots, and this proposal would vacate the 4th filing and replace it with Windshire 6 filing, which consists of 4 lots for senior housing buildings, along with 1 tract for landscaping, access, and drainage. The site is zone residential mixed use. It was part of the Windshire Park, or is part of the Windshire Park master plan. In September 2018, the master plan was amended from multifamily use to senior housing use, and the number of units increased from 58 to 123 based on the sewer capacity difference between regular multifamily townhome use and the senior housing. This here just shows where the access would be located. It's generally consistent with the previous plat, except for it doesn't have a looped road. The access is from Windshire Drive to Guardian Drive,
And this property is 8.5 acres, and again, 4 lots, 1 tract. And concurrently, staff is reviewing a site plan, and this will include the 123 senior housing units. In the event that the senior housing units are not developed and multifamily is developed, then this property would be limited to 58 units. 45% of the property is proposed for landscaping and open space. And this is the site plan that is under review right now. And the landscape plan. There was a neighborhood meeting that was held with the master plan last year, and there was a neighborhood meeting held for the preliminary subdivision on October 29th of last year. Generally, the neighborhood comments were very positive. One of the major changes was that this area in here had consisted of 2-story townhomes that were very close to the rear property line. And Windsor Housing Authority has proposed a cottage-style, 1-story development that's set back further with more open space and landscaping. The larger building will be centrally located, and this will be 2 stories. The preliminary plat is consistent with the comprehensive plan's growth framework, as well as the residential areas framework plan. And one of the key objectives that this proposal meets is fostering a diversity of housing types and supporting higher density near downtown commercial centers and mixed-use nodes. The application is also consistent with the strategic plan. And for the neighborhood meeting, this is the area that was notified according to code requirements as shown here. And staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary major subdivision as presented, and that any remaining Planning Commission and staff comments are addressed with the final subdivision plat. And staff requests that the following be entered into the record: the application, supplemental materials, staff memorandum, and supporting documents, as well as the recommendation. And the applicant is here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks, Carlin. Does the applicant have any further information they want to present? Okay. Comments, questions from the commission?
Would move to approve the preliminary major subdivision plan as presented.
Second.
That's not easy to say, is
I
it?
know, I don't know.
They make fun of me. It's been moved by Commissioner Showerman and seconded by Commissioner Foreman that we approve the preliminary major subdivision as presented, subject to all remaining staff and planning commission issues being addressed on the final major subdivision plan. Those in favor of the motion will vote yes. Those opposed vote no. And motion carries unanimously. Thank you for waiting and sitting through their entire night. Yeah, I bet it was from back there. Communication from Planning Commission. Mr. Foreman.
No communication.
Cindy?
No communications.
How was your first solo flight here? Huh?
It's good.
Nothing.
Nothing? Doug? Nothing. Communications from our town board liaison. David?
I tried to think of something fun and entertaining.
Yeah, by this time of night, it's tough to come up with that. Communication from staff. Carlin?
I just wanted to let Planning Commission know that our planner, Devin King, put in his letter of resignation about 3 weeks ago, and he is moving to Durango, and his last day will be tomorrow. So I'm very sad to see him leave. We are trying to fill his position right now, and we've had quite a few applications, so we'll keep you posted on that.
Keep the turnstile going, huh? Anything else, Carmen?
That's all.
Okay. Melissa?
Yes, I just want to let you know that in the packet that the Avery substation site plan piece, Avery is going through 3 applications right now. One is the conditional use grant, one's the site plan, and one's the minor subdivision. So the site plan came under, might be considered either an administrative or some kind of site plan, but it was such a important part of what we talked about the CUG, we included it here. So any comments from staff, any comments from the town planning commission can be included in our staff
Yeah, I think you
recommendations to it.
captured the essence of what
Yes.
we discussed here, so yeah.
I just want to let you know that's on the
Okay, great.
that packet.
Okay, anything else? Okay, Scott?
Just a couple of dates. If you followed the town board work session Monday night, there was a presentation by CDOT's consulting team that they're working on a study, a very broad brush study. They're calling the Windsor Area Network Study of State Highway 392 and Highway 257. And they didn't have this date on Monday night, but they've narrowed down. They'll have a public open house at the fire station number 1 on March 13th. And so it's not a planning commission meeting, it's an off Wednesday. But they'll be showing their drawings and taking input regarding not only the 2 state highways that traverse Windsor, but other options and any concerns that people have or ideas that people have. So that'll be on March 13th.
Yeah, I was wondering what I was gonna do with my off Wednesdays.
Yeah,
That's
so-
filling in, yeah, pretty quick.
Is the time set for that?
Yeah, it'll be an open house format from 4 to 6:30. Then we'll also be adding to the upcoming meeting dates, the March 25th will be a joint work session with town board, and that'll be to discuss the latest in the code update series. So that'll be on your next agenda. And then this is a really early call, but I just wanted to make sure that you start thinking about if you want to go to the APA conference in Snowmass this year. It is September 18th through the 20th, and even though it's not till September, the block of rooms will be opening up in a couple of months, and we'll want to make sure we get everybody a room in the hotel at the conference. So keep that in mind, look at your schedules. And then lastly, I just want to make sure Amanda catches in the minutes that someone called me their hero tonight. So that's all I have.
We expect the liaison to share that with town board.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta grab them when you can get them, so, yeah, make sure that's in the minutes. Anything, Amanda, do you have any?
I got nothing.
Okay,
Move to adjourn.
we are adjourned.